Hey Bleepinjeepers, it's Tyler here. This week I'm going to show you how to remove the transfer case and transmission from an XJ. This is the newer body style, so 97 to 2000. My brother's tranny's going out on his 2000, so I'm going to give him the tranny out of this. Well, we traded it. He picked me up some half doors for my Wrangler. So let me show you how we're going to do that. So here's what we're up against. Some of the things that you need to do to get these out, I've already done, and I just did them long before I started making videos for Bleepinjeep. But the first thing you want to do is remove your front drive shaft and your rear drive shaft. Get those out of the way. Then you're going to want to disconnect your transfer case linkage. And there's our transfer case shift linkage. I'm going to go ahead and wait until I've drop the cross member and I can scooch the whole transmission and transfer case to the right side a little bit, and then that will easily make it much easier to pop this out without bending any of this stuff. Then there's some electrical connections you've got to deal with. I'm going to take the transmission and the transfer case out as a unit, so I'm going to have to remove, this is the crank position sensor. It plugs in right up here to the motor, so I'm going to disconnect that. Next, let's disconnect our crank position sensor. So it's towards the back of the block. It's this connection right here. Now is a great time to use the trim panel removal tool that I showed you how to make several months ago. I'll leave a link in the description below to that video for those of you who haven't seen it. But this crank position sensor is the connector's held onto the engine intake manifold here by one of those Christmas tree fasteners. And we don't want to really break it. So if we get this tool in there, we should be able to pop that off without breaking it. And that'll make it much easier to disconnect. There we go. Now we just squeeze and disconnect. Now our crank position sensor is disconnected and loose. We've got some breather lines for the transmission and transfer case. This is also the this hooks up to where the throttle is in the engine compartment. It tells the transmission when to shift. So we have to disconnect that. Here's where your transmission kickdown cable comes into your throttle assembly. So we need to get this whole fitting and this connector disconnected and out. So that just, you push it down forward to disconnect that. We're going to give this a gentle squeeze to compress those plastic ears, and then it pops out like that. Now we can fish our kickdown cable back down through the engine compartment. And then there's two electrical connections that run the solenoids in the transmission. We have to disconnect both of those. Alright, these two connectors are located right back here by the transmission dipstick on the back right side of the motor. So it's these two connectors right here we need to disengage. There's one. There's the other one. And then there's two cooling lines on this side. So let me bring the camera around and show you those. So there's two lines that run the coolant from the transmission up to the transmission cooler. They run under the bell housing on this side. They come up. There's a bracket on the bottom of the block up here on the oil pan that holds them in place. And then they finally come up and attach to the transmission cooler itself. Those are going to have to be disconnected. So these coolant lines are just held in with a plastic fitting. You want to be careful not to break it, but you can just come in, carefully squeeze it, and that coolant line will pop right out. Probably be smart to drain the coolant out of your transmission before you pull it out like this. Unfortunately, I'm not very smart. The next thing we're going to need to do is, this is your speedometer sensor, so your speed sensor. And these, there's these three plugs that come off of the engine harness all the way to your transfer case. So you're going to have to remove this one, this one's hooked up inside the body, and then there's one on this side. This is what disconnecting your speedometer, your speed sensor looks like from underneath. This other one that had those wires poking out, this I believe goes to the O2 sensor. Normally your exhaust would be coming right through here, and this plugs into one of the O2 sensors, I believe on your catalytic converter. But so you'll disconnect that. This that goes to your speedo needs to be disconnected. Oh. Pull that little red tab down. Like that. Push up on that and it should come off. I'm going to go ahead and stick this back in before I lose it. Something like that. And then there was one around here on the front that we need to disconnect as well. Now disconnect this one right up in here. Take it easy on that so you don't break it, and it'll come right out just like that. Sorry about that noise in the background. It sounds like whales humping. That one there. They're doing some road construction. I don't know what that is. Maybe a compactor or something. You'll have to disconnect it here from the breather hose and here from the breather hose, and that should free up your transmission and transfer case to be able to pull them out. Now let's take a look at the bolts. Now it's time to remove the bolts that hold the bell housing to the back of the engine. You're going to have to deal with three different sizes of fastener here. You're going to have, down on the bottom, are two 18mm nuts down here. On either side, you've got two 16mm nuts. And then up here on the top are these awful star, like a reverse Torx, I don't know what you call these, but this is a size E12 star bit. And just a recommendation, guys, if you're pulling your transmission out, replace these with a grade 8 regular hex bolt. Get rid of these stupid things. But to get them out, that's what you're going to need, is an E12 star bit. And you can see why I let this down so much now. It gives me a lot of room to get to those bell housing bolts. The motor mounts on this engine are junk, so it rotates quite a bit. I can rotate this almost to the ground. Yours may not rotate this far if you've got good motor mounts, but you will be able to at least gain something. I'm going to start with the top and work my way down. Alright, there's the funky star bit. Now before we take out the last two bolts on the bell housing, we need to separate the torque converter from the flywheel. So to get to it, there's this access panel right here. It's going to be easiest if you take your starter off first. You've already removed these two bolts in the bottom of the bell housing. Now I'm going to remove these two here. They're size 13s. And that should give us access enough to that flywheel to be able to disconnect it from... Oh! I might have to get something a little nastier than this. Alright. Let me get a bigger wrench. Alright, so there looks like there's going to be 4 bolts right here, here, they bolt the flywheel to the torque converter. I want the torque converter to come off with the transmission so that I don't risk damaging the seal between the torque converter and the tranny. So I need to get these off. That's going to mean I've got to rotate the crank on the motor until these are basically in this area where I can get to them. Then I'll pull them out and do that one at a time till all 4 of them are out. You'll need a 19mm socket on a breaker bar to rotate it. And you can see how that one is exposed, and I should be able to reach that with my impact gun. So that'll be nice. They're fairly short. Now we rotate the crank and take the next one off. That's 4. Looks like that's all of them. I can see the torque converter in there now isn't turning, so looks like there's only 4. Awesome. Okay, now we just pop out the 2 remaining bolts on the bell housing, and this thing should come out backing out. Hopefully I don't damage the dipstick getting it out. We're gonna try not to. So I really don't want to damage the dipstick on that tranny. So looking here at my reference tranny, it looks like if I pull this bolt out right here, the dipstick will actually separate right here, and I can pull it straight up and out, and it'll leave this little elbow down on the transmission, but the rest of it will come up and out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that just to be sure I don't damage that. Plus it's going to be really hard to shoehorn that out from under the Jeep with that sticking up anyways. So once you've got all of your electrical connections, your breather tubes, your kick down cable, everything else disconnected, your neutral safety switch, your transfer case shift linkage, your drive shafts, now it's time to pull the transmission from the engine. To do that, we're going to have to drop the crossmember. There are 4 nuts holding the transfer case. There's kind of a coupler right here that's got some rubber bushings in it to prevent too much vibration. That's held on, so it's basically a transmission transfer case mount. It's held onto the cross member with 3 or 4 nuts right here. So you go ahead and pop those out, which it looks like I've done, and I don't remember, I think they were 15mm, I don't remember. Then you really should only have 2 more. There's a nut and a bolt on each end to remove the cross member. Problem is, let me show you. Whatever home skillet installed the lift on this Jeep, instead of going out and buying like a $25 transfer case lowering kit, decided to just stick a piece of pipe in between the cross member and the unibody and weld that sucker in there. So whoever did that, if you happen to be watching this, you suck. Now I got to figure out a way to cut this so that I can get the cross member down and get the transmission and transfer case out. Meanwhile, I have to support the whole thing while I do that. So pretty excited about that. Whoever did this, may the fleas of 1,000 sheepdogs infest your armpit hair. I wasn't kidding about the fleas or the sheepdogs. time to drop that tranny out. Let me show you something I made last year when I rebuilt the tranny in my Tahoe. I needed a transmission jack that I could get down under the vehicle when it was just up on jack stands. And I didn't trust this. I didn't want to try to balance my transmission on this little tiny floor jack. So what I did is I took a piece of 3/4 inch OSB, put a rail on each side, just a 2x2 fur strip, and I took a piece of sheet metal, screwed it to the bottom. I used sheet metal screws that are short enough they wouldn't go all the way through. Cut a little hole in it, and now I just put it on here like this. Presto, I've got a low profile transmission jack. If you're worried about these teeth digging into the bottom of the tranny, I just cut a short piece of carpet scrap and throw it in the bottom of this. But this makes it much easier to get that big heavy transmission out from under your vehicle. And when you do one of these, make sure you drain the transmission before. Oh, because I got a big flipping mess now. Alright, let's see if we can drop this on our head. Oh. Gotta wrangle it out of there, I guess. Yeah, that was a ticket. Alright, good. And once it's out, you don't want to leave your torque converter on, because the weight of it will make the seal in here. Let me show you. There's a seal right here, and if you leave the weight of that torque converter on there, they're quite heavy, it will ruin that seal and you'll develop a leak. So go ahead and pull it off as soon as you get the tranny out. And it's going to be full of transmission fluid, so careful about tipping it or it'll dump out all over the place. We'll set that aside. Oh, those are heavy. Now we can separate it from the transfer case. Should be a lot easier now that it's out. And my brother will have his tranny. Alright guys, that's it for this week. Thanks for watching. As always, like, share, and subscribe. I hope this provides a good reference video for you guys. You can see what the transmission, drivetrain, and everything looks like from outside of the vehicle if you got to pull one of these out. It'll give you a better idea of where everything is. Stay tuned. I pulled another drivetrain the next day, the one that's actually going to go in tetanus. So there'll be some videos from tetanus and the Overlander project coming up. I'll see you guys soon. Thanks.